The puppy followed him for 3 miles, but he was not looking for food. He was looking for someone he already knew. The morning air in Cedar Ridge, Colorado, carried the quiet chill of early autumn as Officer Ethan Walker finished his patrol along the edge of a small neighborhood park. Golden leaves moved slowly across the sidewalks, pushed gently by the wind, while the sound of distant traffic blended with the peaceful rhythm of an ordinary day. Ethan had walked this route hundreds of times. He knew every street corner, every familiar face, every dog that barked from behind backyard fences. But that morning, something felt different. He noticed the small German Shepherd puppy standing near the entrance of the park. The young dog was not running around or searching through trash. He simply watched Ethan. His ears were raised, his tail moved softly, and his eyes remained fixed on the officer as if waiting for a decision. Ethan slowed his steps. "Hey there, buddy," he said quietly. The puppy took one careful step forward, then another. Ethan looked around, expecting someone to call out or come searching for their missing dog. But the park remained quiet. No owner appeared. No worried voice called the puppy's name. Ethan crouched down and extended his hand. The puppy approached slowly, sniffed his fingers, and then sat directly beside him. It was a strange moment. Not because a lost puppy needed help. That happened often. It was the way this puppy looked at him. There was something familiar in those eyes, something Ethan could not explain. He had seen thousands of expressions during his years as a police officer. Fear, confusion, relief, gratitude. But this was different. It felt almost like recognition. Ethan checked the puppy's collar and found only a small metal tag with faded markings. The information was difficult to read, as though years of weather had softened the details. "Where did you come from?" Ethan whispered. The puppy only leaned closer. Ethan eventually contacted the local animal shelter, hoping they could locate the owner. The staff member who arrived was surprised by the puppy's behavior. "He has been calm with everyone," she explained. "But he keeps coming back to you." Ethan gave a small smile. Maybe he just knows who has treats. But deep inside, he knew that was not the reason. The puppy followed him to the patrol vehicle. When Ethan walked away, the young German Shepherd followed. When Ethan stopped, the puppy stopped. When Ethan looked back, the puppy was already looking at him. The shelter worker gently guided the puppy toward her vehicle, promising they would search for his family. Yet before the door closed, the puppy looked back through the window at Ethan. That single moment stayed with him long after he returned to duty. Ethan Walker had spent years protecting people, but he had never expected a small lost puppy to be the one following him home in his thoughts. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Ethan sat alone in his quiet house. The rooms were clean. Everything was organized. Everything was exactly where it belonged. Yet the silence felt heavier than usual. On the shelf near the window sat an old photograph of his father standing beside a German Shepherd from many years ago. Ethan had not looked at that picture in a long time. He did not know why his eyes returned to it that night. He only knew that somewhere across town, a young German Shepherd puppy was waiting. And somehow, without either of them understanding why, their paths had crossed for a reason. The next morning, Ethan Walker found himself checking the animal shelter website before he even finished his first cup of coffee. He told himself it was simply part of being responsible. A lost puppy had crossed his path, and he wanted to know if someone had found its family. But deep down, he knew there was another reason. He wanted to see if the puppy was still waiting. The Cedar Ridge Animal Shelter sat on the edge of town, a quiet building surrounded by tall trees and a small fenced play area where rescued animals spent time outdoors. When Ethan arrived, the shelter worker from the previous day greeted him with a knowing smile. "I had a feeling you would come back," she said. Ethan gave a small laugh. "I just wanted to check if there was any update." She nodded toward the back room. "You should see for yourself." The moment Ethan stepped inside, the young German Shepherd puppy lifted his head. His ears rose instantly. His tail began moving before he even stood up. Within seconds, the puppy walked across the room and sat directly beside Ethan as if they had been separated for weeks instead of hours. The shelter worker watched quietly. "That is what he has been doing since you left," she explained. "He waits by the entrance every time someone walks in. But when it is you, he knows immediately." Ethan looked down at the puppy, confused by the connection he could not explain. "There has to be a reason," he whispered. The shelter worker placed a small folder on the counter. Inside were notes from the intake examination. The puppy had been found alone near a quiet road several miles outside town. No owner had called. No missing report matched his description. But there was one detail that caught Ethan's attention. A small mark had been found beneath the old metal tag attached to the collar. It appeared to be part of a faded engraving that had worn away over time. Ethan carefully looked closer. The shape was simple, almost like a symbol, almost like a memory. For a moment, he felt a strange feeling he had not experienced in years. The same symbol appeared on an old item stored inside his home. An item he rarely touched. An item connected to a chapter of his life he had quietly placed behind him. Ethan stepped back and looked at the puppy again. The German Shepherd tilted his head, watching him with calm, trusting eyes. "Who are you?" Ethan asked softly. The puppy moved closer and rested against his leg. The shelter worker smiled. "Maybe he already knows who you are." Those words followed Ethan throughout the day. During patrol, he found himself thinking about the puppy more than he expected. He remembered the way the dog waited, the way he looked at him, the way he seemed certain that Ethan was exactly where he belonged. That evening, Ethan returned home and opened a small wooden box that had been untouched for years. Inside were old photographs, a few handwritten notes, and a worn leather collar belonging to a German Shepherd that had once been part of his family. Ethan held the collar in his hands and felt a wave of memories return. His father had always said something he never forgot. A loyal dog does not forget the people who love them. Sometimes they just find their way back in a different form. Ethan stared at the old collar, then at the picture beside it. For the first time in many years, he wondered if those words had been more than just a memory. Across town, the puppy sat quietly at the shelter door, watching the entrance and waiting for the person he had chosen to find him again. The old leather collar rested quietly in Ethan Walker's hands as the evening light faded beyond the windows of his home. For several minutes, he remained seated at the kitchen table without moving, his eyes fixed on the worn stitching and faded metal tag that carried memories from a time he rarely allowed himself to revisit. The collar belonged to Max, the German Shepherd who had been part of his family when Ethan was younger. Max had been more than a pet. He had been a companion during his father's long days away, a source of comfort during difficult seasons, and a reminder that loyalty could exist without needing words. Ethan carefully placed the collar beside the old photograph and looked at the image of his father standing proudly beside Max. A quiet question filled his mind. Why did this puppy feel so familiar? The next morning, Ethan returned to the shelter earlier than planned. He told himself he was only there to check on the puppy's progress, but the truth was simpler. He wanted to see him again. When the shelter door opened, the young German Shepherd immediately noticed him. The puppy moved across the room with excitement, but stopped just before reaching Ethan, sitting calmly, as if waiting for permission. Ethan smiled. "You really have a habit of doing that, don't you?" The puppy gently wagged his tail. The shelter worker, Claire Bennett, watched the interaction from behind the counter. "I contacted several local organizations," she explained. "No one has reported losing him. We checked the usual databases, but nothing matches." Ethan looked down at the puppy. "So what happens now?" Claire placed a small folder on the counter. "Before we make any decisions, there is something you should see." Inside the folder were additional notes from the puppy's examination. There was no illness, no signs of neglect. The puppy was healthy and well cared for. Someone had raised him with patience and attention. Claire pointed toward the collar. "That marking is unusual. We tried cleaning the tag, but part of it is too worn to read." Ethan looked closer. The small symbol beneath the faded surface seemed to resemble a simple outline of a mountain with a small star above it. His breath slowed. He knew that symbol. Years ago, his father had carved the same design into a wooden box that sat hidden in Ethan's closet. It was a family symbol, something passed down quietly from one generation to the next. Ethan had not thought about it since his father's passing. "Where did you find this puppy?" he asked. Claire checked the report. "A few miles from an old property outside town." The caller said he was walking alone near the roadside. Ethan felt a strange pull in his chest. The old property, the symbol, the collar. Too many small pieces seemed connected to ignore. That afternoon, Ethan drove to the location listed in the report. The road was quiet, surrounded by open fields and tall trees moving gently in the wind. The puppy rode beside him in the passenger seat, watching every turn as if he recognized the path. When Ethan parked near the old property line, the German Shepherd immediately became alert. He looked toward the abandoned driveway, then back at Ethan. It was not fear in his eyes. It was recognition. Ethan stepped out of the vehicle slowly. For the first time, he wondered if this puppy had not simply followed him by chance. Maybe he had been trying to lead him somewhere all along. Somewhere connected to a promise from the past. Somewhere waiting to reveal why a small German Shepherd puppy had refused to walk away. The old property sat quietly at the end of a narrow country road, hidden behind tall grass and years of forgotten memories. The wooden fence leaned slightly beneath the weight of time, and the empty driveway was covered with fallen leaves that moved gently in the afternoon breeze. Ethan Walker stood beside his patrol vehicle, looking at the place he had not visited since he was a child. The young German Shepherd puppy remained close to his side, staring toward the old farmhouse with a calm certainty that made Ethan feel as though the dog already knew the way home. For several moments, Ethan simply stood there. The memories came slowly. The sound of his father's voice. The smell of fresh-cut wood from the old workshop. The sound of paws running across the porch when Max, the family German Shepherd, would greet him after school. He had spent years convincing himself those moments belonged to the past. But standing there with the puppy beside him, the past felt closer than ever. Ethan walked through the old gate carefully. The puppy followed without hesitation. The abandoned yard was quiet, but there was something peaceful about it. Near the side of the house stood a small wooden shed covered in vines. Ethan remembered it immediately. His father used to spend hours there repairing tools, building small projects, and teaching Ethan lessons that had nothing to do with wood or machines. They were lessons about patience, kindness, and keeping promises. The puppy walked toward the shed and stopped near the door. He looked back at Ethan, not asking, not demanding, simply waiting. Ethan opened the old wooden door, and the scent of aged cedar filled the air. Inside, dust-covered shelves filled with forgotten items. An old toolbox, a few family photographs, a small wooden box with the same mountain and star symbol carved into the lid. Ethan slowly picked it up. His hands felt heavier than expected as he opened it. Inside was a collection of memories carefully preserved by his father. There were letters, old photographs, and beneath them, a small envelope with Ethan's name written across the front. He had never seen it before. His heart began beating faster as he carefully opened the letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was his father's. "Ethan, if you are reading this, then something has brought you back here." He stopped for a moment, feeling the weight of those words. The letter spoke about Max and the special bond between their family and German Shepherds. His father wrote that loyalty was not something that disappeared with time. It was something passed forward through care, trust, and love. Near the bottom of the page was one final sentence that made Ethan pause. "A true companion always finds the person who needs them most." Ethan lowered the letter slowly. Beside him, the puppy sat quietly, watching him with gentle eyes. The connection he had felt from the beginning suddenly became clearer, though many questions remained unanswered. Why was this puppy carrying the same symbol? Why had he followed Ethan through the streets? Why had he chosen him? Ethan looked toward the old photograph of Max resting beside his father. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that some bonds might continue long after people think they are gone. The puppy gently placed his head against Ethan's hand. A simple gesture, a quiet reminder. And in that forgotten place filled with memories, Ethan realized he was no longer searching for the reason this puppy had followed him. He was beginning to understand that maybe the puppy had been searching for him all along. The letter remained open on the wooden workbench long after the afternoon sunlight began fading through the dusty windows of the old shed. Ethan Walker read the final words again and again, trying to understand how something written years ago could feel like it had been waiting for this exact moment. Outside, the young German Shepherd puppy rested quietly beside the doorway, watching him with the same calm eyes that had followed him through the streets of Cedar Ridge. Ethan carefully folded the letter and placed it back inside the wooden box, but he did not close the lid. For the first time in many years, he wanted to remember instead of avoid. The old property no longer felt like a place filled only with things he had lost. It felt like a place where something new had begun. Before leaving the shed, Ethan noticed another small envelope tucked beneath the photographs. Unlike the first letter, this one was not addressed to him. It carried only a single word written across the front. For the future. Ethan hesitated before opening it. Inside was a short note, and a photograph of Max as a young German shepherd sitting beside his father. On the back of the photograph was another message written in his father's familiar handwriting. The strongest bonds are not measured by time. They are measured by the love we leave behind. Ethan looked down at the puppy beside him. The German shepherd had moved closer, resting his chin gently on Ethan's boot. The simple gesture brought back a memory he had not visited in years. When Ethan was a child, Max used to do the same thing whenever he was upset. No matter what happened, the dog always seemed to know when someone needed comfort. Ethan smiled softly. "You remind me of him," he whispered. The puppy lifted his head as if he understood. Later that evening, Ethan returned to the animal shelter with the puppy beside him. Claire Bennett was waiting at the front desk and immediately noticed the change in Ethan's expression. The uncertainty from the previous days had been replaced with something calmer. "You found something," she said. Ethan nodded. "I found answers. But I also found more questions." Claire looked toward the puppy, who was sitting peacefully beside Ethan. "I think he already knew the answer." Ethan laughed quietly. It was the first genuine laugh Claire had heard from him. Together, they reviewed the remaining information about the puppy. There was still no official record connecting him to Ethan's family, but there was one important discovery. The small symbol on the collar matched a registered family mark that had belonged to Ethan's father years earlier. It was not enough to explain everything, but it was enough to show that the connection was real. Claire gently placed the paperwork on the counter. "Maybe some things are not meant to be explained immediately," she said. "Maybe they are meant to be felt first." Ethan looked at the puppy. For most of his adult life, he had believed moving forward meant leaving the past behind. But this small German shepherd had shown him something different. Sometimes moving forward meant allowing the past to bring something meaningful back. When Ethan finally signed the adoption papers, the puppy did not jump or make noise. He simply walked closer and rested beside him, exactly where he had been from the beginning. Outside, the evening sky turned orange above Cedar Ridge. Ethan stepped out of the shelter carrying a leash in one hand and a feeling he had almost forgotten in his heart. He had spent years protecting others as an officer, but now a small puppy had reminded him that healing could arrive quietly, with forepaws, a trusting gaze, and a loyalty that never needed words. The days after Ethan Walker brought the German Shepherd puppy home felt different from any other days he could remember. His house, once filled only with quiet footsteps and the distant sound of the television in the background, slowly began to carry the gentle rhythm of a new companion. The puppy, now officially named Atlas, seemed to understand the meaning of home before Ethan fully understood it himself. Every morning, Atlas waited beside the kitchen door while Ethan prepared coffee. Every evening, he rested near the old photograph of Max and Ethan's father, almost as if he was protecting a piece of history that connected them all. Ethan noticed small things that reminded him of the past. The way Atlas tilted his head when hearing certain words. The way he followed him from room to room without needing anything. The way he seemed happiest simply being near him. But Ethan also noticed something else. Atlas was not only bringing back memories, he was creating new ones. One Saturday morning, Ethan decided to take Atlas to the old family property again. The fields were bright beneath the summer sun, and the quiet road that once felt forgotten now seemed peaceful. Atlas walked beside him with a relaxed confidence, stopping occasionally to explore the familiar surroundings. When they reached the old wooden shed, Atlas walked directly toward the entrance and sat beside the doorway. Ethan smiled. "You remember this place, don't you?" Of course, he knew the puppy could not answer. Yet somehow, the silence felt meaningful. Inside the shed, Ethan organized the remaining items left by his father. He found more photographs, old tools, and several notes about Max. One page caught his attention. It was a simple journal entry written years ago. His father described Max's ability to sense when people needed comfort. He wrote about how the dog always stayed close during difficult moments, not because he was trained to do so, but because loyalty came naturally. Ethan slowly closed the journal. For years, he had admired his father's strength, but never understood where it came from. Now he realized part of that strength came from allowing love and companionship into his life. Outside the shed, Atlas waited patiently beneath the shade of a large tree. When Ethan stepped outside, the puppy immediately stood and walked beside him. No excitement, no demand for attention, just quiet companionship. Later that afternoon, Ethan visited Claire Bennett at the shelter to thank her for helping Atlas find his way home. She watched the two of them walk through the front doors and smiled. "He changed you," she said. Ethan looked surprised. "Changed me?" Claire nodded gently. "Before, you looked like someone who was always protecting everyone else. Now you look like someone who finally understands that you are allowed to be cared for too." Ethan looked down at Atlas, who was resting beside his boots. The word stayed with him. He had spent years carrying responsibilities, solving problems, and standing strong for others. But he had forgotten what it felt like to simply share a moment with someone who expected nothing in return. That evening, Ethan placed Max's old collar beside Atlas's new one on the shelf near the family photograph. They were different collars, different times, different stories, but they carried the same message. Loyalty does not disappear. It continues through every act of kindness, every memory protected, and every soul willing to find its way back. As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Atlas rested beside Ethan on the porch. The same porch where Ethan had once sat alone with his thoughts. Now there was a quiet presence beside him, and for the first time in years, the silence no longer felt empty. Months passed quietly in Cedar Ridge, and the bond between Ethan Walker and Atlas grew stronger with every ordinary day they shared. What began as a mysterious encounter on a quiet street had become something neither of them could have expected. Atlas was no longer the lost German Shepherd puppy who followed a police officer without explanation. He was now family. Every morning, the sound of forepaws moving across the wooden floor became part of Ethan's routine. Every evening, the porch where Ethan once sat alone became the place where two companions watched the sunset together. Yet even as life became peaceful, one question remained in Ethan's heart. Why had Atlas found him? The answer seemed close, but never completely revealed. Then one autumn afternoon, Ethan received a phone call from Claire Bennett at the animal shelter. Her voice carried a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Ethan, I think you should come by when you have time. We found something connected to Atlas's records." Ethan arrived within the hour with Atlas sitting calmly beside him in the passenger seat. Inside the shelter, Claire placed an old folder on the desk. It contained updated information from a regional animal registry that had recently recovered archived records. The details were incomplete, but one name appeared several times. Max. Ethan felt his expression change. Max was not just a name. It was the name of the German Shepherd who had been part of his childhood. Claire explained that Atlas's lineage could be traced back through several generations of working German Shepherds. One of the earlier records included a note from a family breeder who had worked closely with Ethan's father many years ago. The connection was not a coincidence. Atlas came from the same line of dogs that had once brought comfort and loyalty to Ethan's family. Ethan looked down at Atlas, who was sitting quietly near his feet. The puppy was no longer small, but he still carried the same gentle expression that had first caught Ethan's attention. Claire smiled softly. "Maybe he did not know your name. Maybe he did not remember your face. But something in him recognized something familiar." Those words stayed with Ethan. That evening, he returned home and opened the old wooden box once again. This time, he looked through the memories not with sadness, but with gratitude. He found another photograph hidden between the pages of his father's journal. It showed Max sitting beside a younger Ethan, both looking toward the camera with complete trust. On the back, his father had written a simple sentence: "The best companions are the ones who remind us who we are." Ethan read the words several times. For years, he had believed losing Max meant losing a part of his childhood that could never return. But Atlas had shown him something different. Some connections do not disappear. They change shape. They find new ways to enter our lives. Later that night, Ethan sat on the porch with Atlas resting beside him. The mountains beyond Cedar Ridge turned dark beneath the evening sky, and the air carried the familiar scent of pine trees and fresh earth. Ethan gently placed his hand on Atlas's head. "You know, I spent a long time thinking I had lost everything connected to that part of my life." Atlas looked up at him quietly. "But maybe I was wrong." The German Shepherd leaned closer, resting against Ethan's leg. No words were needed. No explanation was necessary. In that quiet moment, Ethan finally understood why the puppy had followed him from the beginning. Atlas was not chasing a stranger. He was following a feeling, a memory, a connection passed through time. And somewhere deep inside, Ethan knew his father would have smiled seeing them together. Because some promises are never forgotten. They simply wait for the right moment to return. The first snow of winter arrived quietly in Cedar Ridge, covering the streets, rooftops, and mountain trails with a soft layer of white. For most people, snow meant colder mornings and longer nights. But for Ethan Walker, it carried a different meaning. It reminded him of a time when he believed some chapters of life had already ended. Now, as he stood beside the window of his home watching snowflakes fall, he saw something different. He saw a reminder that some things were not lost forever. Sometimes, they simply returned when the heart was ready. Behind him, Atlas rested peacefully near the fireplace, his thick German shepherd coat glowing softly in the warm light. He was no longer the small puppy who had followed Ethan through the neighborhood streets. He had grown into a confident and loyal companion, yet the gentle spirit that first captured Ethan's attention had never changed. The bond between them had become something the entire community noticed. Neighbors often saw Ethan and Atlas walking through town together. Children would stop to greet Atlas, and the German shepherd would patiently lower his head, accepting every gentle touch with calm kindness. People knew him not just as a police officer's dog, but as a friend who seemed to bring comfort wherever he went. One afternoon, Ethan received an invitation from the Cedar Ridge Community Center. They were hosting a small event to recognize local service members, first responders, and the animals that supported them. Ethan almost declined. He had never been comfortable receiving attention. But when he looked at Atlas waiting beside the door, he knew the invitation was not only about him. The event was held beneath a clear winter sky. Families gathered around, sharing stories and warm drinks while children played nearby. When Ethan and Atlas arrived, many people smiled immediately. They had heard the story of the puppy who would not stop following the officer, but few had ever understood the deeper meaning behind it. During the ceremony, Ethan stood quietly beside Atlas while the community leader spoke about loyalty and compassion. But Ethan knew the greatest lesson was not about recognition. It was about connection. After the event, an older man approached Ethan. He introduced himself as someone who had known his father many years earlier. His name was Daniel Harris, and he carried an old photograph tucked carefully inside his wallet. "I thought you might want to see this," Daniel said. The photograph showed Ethan's father standing beside Max, and a younger version of himself. Ethan looked closely and noticed something he had never seen before. Around Max's collar was the same small mountain and star symbol that appeared on Atlas's tag. Daniel smiled softly. "Your father always believed that loyalty was something worth protecting. He said good dogs and good people have a way of finding each other." Ethan looked down at Atlas. The German shepherd was sitting calmly beside him, unaware that he had once again connected pieces of the past. That evening, when they returned home, Ethan placed the photograph beside the wooden box containing his father's memories. Then he sat on the porch with Atlas beside him, watching the first stars appear above the quiet mountains. The porch light turned on automatically as darkness settled over Cedar Ridge. Years earlier, Ethan had thought he was sitting beneath that light alone, carrying memories that could never return. Now he understood something his father had always known. Love does not disappear when someone leaves. It continues through the lives they touched, the kindness they shared, and the companions who carry those memories forward. Atlas rested his head against Ethan's hand, and Ethan smiled quietly. The puppy who had followed him into the unknown had become the reason he finally found his way back to himself. Years passed quietly in Cedar Ridge, but the memory of the small German shepherd puppy who followed Officer Ethan Walker through town never faded. The story had become one of those rare moments people continue to share, not because it involved something extraordinary, but because it reminded them of something deeply human. A simple connection, a forgotten promise, a bond that refused to disappear. Atlas grew older beside Ethan, but the loyalty that brought them together never changed. The young puppy who once stood uncertain on a quiet sidewalk became a strong and gentle German shepherd who walked beside Ethan through every season of life. Every morning, Atlas still waited near the kitchen door. Every evening, he rested beside the porch where Ethan had once spent years sitting alone with memories of the past. But now the silence carried warmth. It carried the sound of breathing, the movement of paws across wooden floors, and the peaceful feeling of knowing someone was always there. Ethan continued his work as a police officer, helping people throughout Cedar Ridge with the same patience and dedication his father had always admired. Yet those who knew him noticed something had changed. He smiled more. He spoke more openly. He allowed himself to enjoy simple moments instead of always carrying old burdens. Everyone knew Atlas had something to do with it. One autumn afternoon, Ethan returned to the old family property with Atlas walking beside him. The fields were covered with golden leaves, and the wooden shed where he discovered his father's letters still stood beneath the trees. He brought a small wooden box and placed it inside the shed, creating a quiet place where the memories of Max and his father could remain safe. Atlas walked inside and sat beside the old photograph of Max. Ethan smiled as he looked at them together. Different generations, different moments, the same loyalty. You found your way here, Ethan whispered. Atlas looked up at him with calm, familiar eyes. And somehow, you brought me back too. That evening, Ethan returned home as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The porch light turned on, casting a warm glow across the front steps. Atlas settled beside him, resting his head near Ethan's feet just as he had done on the first day they met. The difference was that this time, Ethan understood exactly what the moment meant. The puppy had never simply been following an officer. He had been following a connection, a piece of history, a promise passed quietly through time. Many years earlier, Ethan believed he had lost the most meaningful parts of his past. He believed some memories belonged only in photographs and old boxes. But Atlas taught him something different. The people and companions who shape our lives never truly leave us. They continue through kindness, through loyalty, and through the unexpected souls who arrive when we need them most. As the stars appeared above Cedar Ridge, Ethan placed one hand gently on Atlas's fur. The German shepherd closed his eyes peacefully, knowing he was exactly where he belonged. The porch light continued shining into the quiet night, not as a symbol of something missing, but as a reminder that something beautiful had returned. Because some bonds are never lost. They simply wait for the right heart to find them again.